But let's begin with President Biden, who remains optimistic that lawmakers will pass his multi-trillion-dollar social spending plan. Negotiations are ongoing, but two Democratic holdouts remain, Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Despite this, the president says he is confident he'll get a deal done before his trip to Europe next week. He discussed the ongoing talks during a CNN town hall in Baltimore last night.
When you're in the United States Senate and you're a president of the United States and you have 50 Democrats, every one is a president. Every single one. So you got to work things out.
Some Democrats said they hope to reach an internal agreement by the end of the week. Nancy Cordes is joining us now from the White House to discuss. So lots of news made yesterday, Nancy, during that CNN town hall with the president. But let's begin with this. Could we see lawmakers reach an agreement by, I'm going to be optimistic here, by end of today, before the CBS Evening News, maybe?
I wouldn't put my money on that. I suppose it is possible that Democrats could reach an agreement by the end of the week, as you've heard so many of them say they hope to do. But you've got to take your cues in this situation from the holdouts. The two people who are in the room negotiating with the entire rest of the party, that's Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Manchin said yesterday he thinks it's very unlikely they will reach an agreement by the end of the week because they're still hashing through a lot of the big details, and there's nothing that has been written down on paper yet. How can you come to an agreement, he said, if the details haven't been hammered out and you don't have a chance to read the fine print? So that's not a great sign for getting a deal done by the end of the week, nor is the fact that the president in his town hall last night sort of ticked through a litany of different areas where he is not seeing eye to eye with Manchin and Sinema. He said he and the rest of the Democrats are trying to come up with a bunch of workarounds for the policies that Manchin and Sinema don't like. But these are entirely new programs, new proposals, and hashing them out is going to take time.
So, to that point, the president and the White House have actually been kind of careful about criticizing Manchin and Sinema, sort of tiptoeing around them. But, you point out the tone kind of changed a little last night. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that we are really reaching an inflection point for this White House and for the Democratic Party. They have let these negotiations with Manchin and Sinema drag on for weeks now. They really haven't had much of a choice. They cannot pass these bills without the support of Manchin and Sinema, and yet they are still at loggerheads on so many issues. And so what you saw the president do last night, not outwardly disparage the two of them, but to say, look, here are the things that I want to do, and they are standing in the way. They don't agree with me. He was very careful to say that he thinks they're very intelligent, that they are often on his side at the end of the day, but he was trying to put a little more pressure on them, frankly, than he has in recent weeks, and the White House has in recent weeks, to say, look, I'm going to go public with some of the things that have been keeping us apart behind closed doors, the kind of things that reporters have been ferreting out over the past few days. Now the president is just putting them all on display for the nation to see.
Nancy, you covered Congress and the Senate for years before you started covering the White House. And I wonder, just to explain to our viewers who may be trying to understand, if you're a Democrat and you see that when we and other news organizations poll Democrats, they overwhelmingly want to see this legislation passed. Manchin and Sinema are Democrats. I understand that they have their constituents and they have to do what they feel is right for their states, but help our viewers understand that push and pull between the overall agenda that Democrats overall want to see versus what a senator may feel is necessary or what they feel they need to do for the interests of their own states.
Well, public polling is certainly something that can have an impact on a senator or House member's decisions, but there are a lot of other things that can impact them as well. You talked about the dynamics in their own state and what they think would be best for their constituents. And they're just their own personal beliefs. There have been plenty of times in history when lawmakers have gone one way, even though the majority of their state probably would have supported something else because that lawmaker just feels so strongly. And then there are times when you got a moderate lawmaker who just feels differently on an issue than the rest of his or her party. Look at how many times, for instance, Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, two moderate Republicans, broke from the rest of the Republican Party on issue after issue, or Mitt Romney for that matter. They were also under tremendous pressure from their own party on issues like abortion or impeachment, but they ended up going a different way because they just felt so strongly. So yes, public opinion can have an impact on a Manchin or a Sinema to a point, but at the end of the day, there's a whole host of complicated rationales behind what they do, why they do what they do. I think in this case, what is so difficult to discern is exactly what it is that is motivating Kyrsten Sinema in particular. You know, when Lisa Murkowski or Susan Collins broke with their party, they were usually very vocal about why it is that they disagreed, and they were pretty consistent. You know, these are views and beliefs that they had held for a long time. So it wasn't a huge surprise when they broke from their party on issues like abortion. Everyone knew that they were pro-choice. When it comes to Sinema, it's a little harder to understand what her end game is here. She voted against the Republican tax cuts in 2017, and now she is saying that she can't support increasing the very taxes that the Republicans cut. That appears to be a big reversal for her, and because she hasn't really explained her position publicly, she ignores reporters when we try to ask her questions about it. Even a lot of her Democratic colleagues are in the dark. It makes it very difficult for Democrats to know what it is they can do to try to get her support, get this bill across the finish line.
So speaking of, you know, maybe changing one's tune or altering one's opinion, you know, the president for a very long time did not want to entertain touching the filibuster at all. And then we heard him maybe a couple of weeks suggest that he was open to, I don't know, tweaking. And then he seemed to sound quite different yesterday in terms of the filibuster. Last night we heard him say that he's open to doing away with it.
Right.
Why is he changing his tune now?
That is a big shift. It's not an entirely unsurprising shift. We always got the sense that President Biden was kind of holding back initially. He wasn't just going to come out guns a-blazing his very first few months of the presidency to say, yes, he's in favor of abolishing the filibuster. He wanted to move more slowly. And now, with about 9 months under his belt, he can point to the fact that his party has tried repeatedly to pass voting rights legislation, for instance, and it has been unable to do so because it does not have the support of any Republicans in Congress. This is an issue that is of utmost importance to his party. He knows that if he can't pass voting rights legislation, there are going to be a lot of dejected Democrats, and that there are a lot of Democrats whose seats will be in danger because his party feels so strongly that Republicans in state legislatures around the country are making changes to the voting systems that they see as fundamentally unfair and undemocratic. And so, you know, this is not sort of an esoteric issue. This is an issue that cuts to the heart of the Democratic Party, its beliefs, and its chances of winning re-election in 2022. And so if they can't make any progress, there's going to be an increasing amount of pressure on the president to, you know, get behind doing away with the full filibuster in a more full-throated way.
All right, Nancy, thank you very much.
You're welcome.